Hi, I'm Tom Lippincott, and this short video is going to cover the topic of shell voicings. This is a system for playing jazz chords on the guitar. This is meant for somebody who maybe is just getting into playing jazz and maybe only knows a few chords and is a little bit mystified as to how all this stuff works, and maybe has seen some chord symbols that they don't know how to play those chords, or are not quite sure that the chords they're playing are the right ones, and so forth. First, we're going to cover just a little bit of basic theory to get us started, and then we'll jump right in and go through these voicings. On my 8-string guitar here, I'm going to go to my B string, which is the 3rd string over from the edge. If you are unsure about the way the guitar is set up, you can also check out the video that I have up explaining this guitar. But this is my B string, just like a normal guitar. So I've got the C on the 1st fret. And what I'm going to do is, on this one string, I'm going to play up a C major scale. And the way I'm going to do that is by following the formula of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half that major scales are built from. Now, as most of you probably already know, the major scale is sort of the alphabet for music. It's the building blocks that all kinds of chords and melodies are built from. So that's the reason it's important to have an understanding of that for chords. Okay, so we're starting with C, then we're going up a whole step to D, 2 frets, up another whole step to E, up a half step to F, up a whole step to G, a whole step to A, a whole step to B, and finally the octave C, which just sounds like the same pitch but higher. So that's how I get my major scale: whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now, aside from giving these notes their letter names, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, we can also, for the purposes of harmonies and melodies, give them numbers. We usually call the first note the root. It's kind of like the roots of the tree. It's like the starting point. And then each number, or each note thereafter, is going to get a number. So the D is going to be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then back to the octave root. So again, root, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, root. Now, the way that a chord is built is by choosing particular numbers of notes. And the way that this is typically done is we start with the root, skip the 2nd note, go to the 3rd note, skip the 4th note, go to the 5th note. That gives us our basic triad or 3-note chord, but jazz is almost exclusively played with 4-note chords or 7th chords, where we add another note on top of that. So I've got root, 3rd, 5th, skip the 6th note, go to the 7th note. So I end up with root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, and I'm going to call that chord C major 7th. It is the chord that I get that's a 7th chord from the C major scale. Thus the name kind of makes sense, C major 7. And we can also say that this has a natural 3rd, natural 5th, natural 7. Natural simply meaning it conforms to what it would normally be in the major scale. If it's anything other than those particular notes and intervals, it's going to be called something else, and that's how we're going to get the other kinds of chords. So secondly, I'm going to take that C major 7, root, natural 3rd, natural 5th, natural 7th, and if we take that natural 7th note, the B, and lower it by a half step to B flat, we're going to call that a flat 7th or a minor 7th. And now the chord becomes what is technically called a C dominant 7th chord. Root, 3rd, 5th, flat 7. Now, in everyday use, that chord is usually just called C7. It's so common that people just kind of dispense with the word dominant and just call it C7. So if somebody asks for a C7 chord, that's the chord they're talking about. And if they want the first chord that we played, they've got to further define that by saying major 7. Okay, so that's the first two. Next, we have the minor 7 chord. If we start with the C7 chord that we just played, root, 3rd, 5th, flat 7, we're now going to lower the 3rd to a flat 3rd, and we'll get root, flat 3rd, 5th, flat 7, and that's our minor 7 chord. Next, we move on to half diminished, also known as minor 7 flat 5. That one kind of has two names, and as you might guess, it's like a minor 7 chord but with a flat fifth. So flat third, and now instead of natural fifth we have flat fifth, and instead of natural 7 we have flat 7. So root, flat third, flat fifth, flat 7. It's like everything's flat on this one. Next in line is the fully diminished 7th. That one is if we take a half diminished chord and we take that 7th note and flat it a second time. Now technically that makes the note B double flat, but in actuality it's the same pitch as A. So in the jazz and pop world we usually dispense with formalities, and we're looking to streamline things as much as we can, so we just call it A. So we say C, E flat, G flat, or flat third, flat fifth, and double flat 7, which is A. So there's fully diminished 7th. Next in line is going to be the two 6th chords. So if we go back to the idea of major 7th first, root, natural 3rd, natural 5th, natural 7, if we replace the 7th note of the scale with the 6th note of the scale, which again is A, we get this sound. Root, 3rd, 5th, 6th. And that's a C6. Again, technically it would be a C major 6, but for short it's just called C6. So that's what that chord symbol means if you see that. If you see a C minor 6, it's the same idea, but with a flat third instead of a natural third. So root, flat third, 5th, 6th. And those 7 chords basically constitute all of the basic harmonies that are used in jazz and in standards, traditional jazz. If you know and are familiar with those 7 chords, you can play just about any tune. So far we've just been talking theoretically. You may be thinking, well, what am I supposed to do with that? That doesn't sound anything like chords that, I've heard people play. Okay, but we're just establishing the theoretical basis for building chords. So now we're going to figure out a way to actually voice them, which means to play them in particular places on the guitar. And the idea of shell voicings comes into play here. Now you might know a few chords already, maybe a D minor 7 or G7, maybe a C major 7, right? Well, those are fine. There's nothing wrong with those chords. They're perfectly respectable chords. They're kind of big and maybe kind of clunky, you might say, for jazz. Jazz players typically like to have their chords fairly kind of stripped down, and it's kind of like less is more. And that's part of the idea with shell voicings. They're stripped down to their basic essentials. And so the first rule, there's going to be 3 rules for shell voicings. First one is get rid of the 5th. The 5th of each one of these chords is the least important note. It doesn't really do much in most of the chords. It's just kind of along for the ride. So it's the first one that can go. So a shell voicing is really just root, 3rd, and 7th of a chord, or if it's a 6th chord, it'll be root, 3rd, and 6th. So that's the first thing, is we got rid of the 5th. Next, the second rule is we're going to take the root of each one of the chords and always play the root on either the 5th string or the 6th string. Why? Because that will put the root in a low bass register so that we can clearly hear that note as the bass note of the chord. So that when we're playing a chord progression, it's real easy to hear the bass line. So, for example, if I wanted to play a C major 7 shell voicing, first step after leaving out the 5th of the chord would be to find my C on the 5th string, which would be here at the 3rd fret, and then on the 6th string here at the 8th fret. And I can build shell voicings for C major 7 from both of those places. That brings us to the 3rd rule, which is we're going to put the 3rd and the 7th on the 2 middle strings of the guitar. That would be the D and the G strings. So that means for this first one that I played, the C here on the 3rd fret of the A string, I'm going to look for an E and a B that are within easy reach of this note on these 2 middle strings. And it just so happens that there's an E here on the 4th string 2nd fret and a B here on the 4th fret of the 3rd string. And there's my C major 7 shell voicing. So that's all the information I need to hear that that's a C major 7. Okay, so now I'm going to build the other types of chords from this one by doing the same thing I did when I was in the theoretical realm. I'm going to take the 7th and lower it by a half step, which is right here, my B, to get C7. There's my C dominant 7 or C7. To get the C minor 7, I'm going to take my 3rd of C7 and lower it. I get this shape, and that's C minor 7. Now here's one extra little bonus for the shell voicings, is to get from here to C half diminished. I don't have to do anything at all because I'm leaving out the 5th of the chord, and the only difference between C minor 7 and C half diminished is the 5th. So this shape also does double duty as C half diminished, C minor 7 flat 5. Next would be C fully diminished. We take the half diminished and lower the 7th a second time from B flat to A on the 2nd fret of the G string. There's my C fully diminished. And then I just have the 2 6th chords to figure out. I'll go back to C major 7. I'm going to take my 7th note of the scale, just like I did before, move it down to the 6th note of the scale, B 2 frets down to A, and that gives me C6 like this. And then finally, to get C minor 6, I can take C major 6 or C6 and lower the E to E flat, and there's my C minor 6. Now you might have noticed that this is the same shape that we used for C fully diminished. So there's another extra added bonus with the shell voicings. We covered 7 different types of chords with only 5 different particular shapes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for 7 different chords. So now all we have to do is work out 5 more with the root on the 6th string, and we'll basically have all the shell voicings. So, next thing I'm going to do is put my root on the 6th string and go through the same process. So now I want to find a B and an E on the 2 middle strings. Now, I'm not going to want to use the ones down here because that's way too big of a stretch. But what I'm going to do is find a B here on the 4th string 9th fret and an E on the 3rd string 9th fret. And there's my C major 7 shell voicing. So there's the 2. Now let's find the other shell voicings. C dominant 7, what do? Remember, we lower the 7th, which is B, down a half step. So there's C7. Now to get C minor 7, lower the 3rd of C7 to E flat, flat 3rd. This also does double duty as C half diminished. And then we take the flat 7th of C half diminished, lower it to double flat 7, and we get C fully diminished 7th. Now a brief word about chord symbols here. You've seen the chord symbols in the display here, but notice that that chord symbol for C half diminished looks like a circle, which is actually a shortened form that means diminished, and then with the line through it just means it's cut in half. So that's where the half diminished concept comes from. And then if you just see the C with the circle, that means fully diminished 7th, or just for short, C diminished. And then also, you've also seen this triangle or delta symbol that means major 7. So that's what that means. Sometimes you'll see it written out as MAJ7 or MA7. And then same thing with half diminished. Sometimes it'll be written as minor 7 flat 5. Okay, then we just have the 6th chords to deal with. Go back to C major 7. Find your B, which is right here on the 4th string. Bring the B down 2 frets or a whole step to A, and there's C6. And then finally lower the 3rd of C6, that'll give us C minor 6. And again, same shape that we were using for C diminished and C minor 6. Okay, so that gives us 10 different chord shapes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. For 7 different for 7 different types of chords. If you know those 7 different types of chords and can play those 7 different fingerings, you can pretty much play any jazz tune or standard and sound pretty professional and use pretty good voice leading. That's one of the advantages of using chords all within one system like this, is you're pretty much guaranteed to get pretty good voice leading. And let's talk about that a little bit. The next thing that we want to do once we've learned those basic shapes is to play a common chord progression that happens in a lot of tunes that's called the 2-5-1 progression. And most of you are probably already familiar with that, or at least have heard of it before. There's plenty of online resources that can give you a real thorough theoretical explanation of it. For those of you who might be interested in my Mike's Masterclass, Jazz Guitar Harmony series actually goes into quite detail about all of this stuff, the shell voicings and all the different things we can do with them, and 2-5-1 progressions, and quite a bit of other things as well. But anyway, however you get this information, let's find a 2-5-1 on the guitar. So I'm going to start with the key of C. The 2 chord is D minor 7. The 5 chord is G7. And the 1 chord is C major 7. That forms the basic 2-5-1. So let's say that I was going to finish out my 2-5-1 progression with this C major 7. That's my home base. So there's 2 possible D minor 7s I could play. One with the root on the 6th string here on the 10th fret, and one with the root on the 5th string 5th fret. Of course, this one obviously is much closer to the C major 7, so if I build the minor 7 chord shape from here, I don't have too far to go to get to C major 7. So finally, I just have to add the middle chord, the G7. So I'm going to find the 2 places to play G7. I've got G with the root on the 6th string, and of course my low E string is not the string on the very edge, it's the one over, my low B string here, but this is my 6th string, or my low E string. So there's a G, and then I've also got G with the 5th string 10th fret up here. Obviously, of those 2, this one's going to be closer to these 2 chords, so I'll build the G7 from here. Remember the shape that I played for C7 up here? I'll just move it down to there to G, and that gives me my G7 shape. So I put all 3 chords together, get this nice, smooth, voice-led C major, 2-5-1 and C major chord progression. Sounds much smoother than if I'd done or, there is using shell voicings, but I jumped way up to get the G7. So conversely, if I were to start the G minor 7 instead of here, if I started up here, then of course I'm going to want to use the higher G7 and the higher C major 7 to go with it. And that also gives me the really nice voice leading. Notice there's very little movement on the middle strings. It's the bass that has all the action. Same up here. And that's generally what people mean when they talk about good voice leading. It means that the stuff in the middle doesn't move a lot. The kind of 3 elements that we deal with in music are the bass, which is the low register, and that can jump around quite a bit. The melody, the featured thing that happens in the high register, and then the stuff in the middle kind of has to stay out of the way of both of those things. So that's where this voice leading idea comes into play. Okay, so let's say that you've got your 2-5-1 happening. Now the next step would be to make sure you can play it in all 12 keys. And again, that goes beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about here, but that stuff is readily available. And again, I'd invite you to check out the Jazz Guitar Harmony series that covers that all in detail. But let's say that you can do your 2-5-1 progression in all 12 keys. And the next step would be to apply it to playing a tune. So to finish things out, I'm going to play the chord progression from the standard Autumn Leaves, and I'm going to use only shell voicings to show what great voice leading these can provide, and also to show how they can give sort of a complete sense of the harmony and the bass line. And I'm playing it in the key of G minor or B flat major. Some people also play it in E minor or G major, where the first chord is A minor 7, but the version I'm playing, the first chord is C minor 7. So if you want to follow along on a version that you have, that would be the key. The only other thing that I'm going to mention first before I play this is the rhythms that I'm going to use for comping. These are going to be 2 very kind of typical jazz comping rhythms. The first one's called the Charleston rhythm. It starts off with playing a chord on beat 1 as a dotted quarter note, and then another chord that's short on the and of beat 2. And that looks like this, and it sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and then I'm going to use that rhythm for all the chords except for a couple places in the tune. There's a couple places in the tune that have two chords in the same bar, 2 beats of one chord, 2 beats of another. So what I'm going to do with those two spots is I'm going to play a chord on beat 1 and on the end of 1, rest on beat 2, then I'm going to play the next chord on beat 3 and the end of 3, and rest on beat 4. And that might sound something like this: 2, 3, 4. So there was two chords in the same measure with 1 and rest, 3 and rest. Okay, so here's the whole chord progression with those two sets of comping rhythms using just the shell voicings. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that would be my recommendation if you're just getting into playing jazz guitar and you want to learn how to comp chord changes and get your feet wet with playing some tunes right away. Get a handle on those shell voicings and you'll be up and running pretty quickly. I hope this has been some help to somebody, and I wish you all the best of luck with your musical pursuits. Thanks a lot.